I came home from 12 days in Portland visiting my brother, and my key wouldn't turn in the lock. I stood there on my own front porch, the porch I built with my own hands back in 1987, and I tried that key 3 times. Then I looked at it, thinking maybe I'd grabbed the wrong one by mistake. But no, it was the right key. Same worn brass, same notch I'd accidentally filed too deep about 15 years ago. The key was right. The lock had been changed. I set my suitcase down, took a breath, looked at the yard. My hydrangeas were still there, a little overgrown now, and the old weather vane my late wife Carol had picked out was still spinning on the garage roof. Everything looked like my house. It just wouldn't let me in anymore. I pulled out my phone and called my son. He picked up on the second ring, and before I could even say where I was, I heard it in his voice, that particular flatness. Like he'd been rehearsing. "Dad," he said, "we need to talk." "I'm standing on my front porch," I told him. "My key doesn't work." There was a pause. Then he said, "Yeah, about that. Lena and I have been talking, and we think it's time for you to move somewhere more appropriate for your age." I'm 67 years old. I run 3 miles every Tuesday and Thursday morning. I do my own taxes. I drove to Portland alone and back, but my son had decided I needed somewhere appropriate for my age. "We changed the locks," he said. "We figured it would be easier this way, less back and forth." I asked him where my things were. "We're sorting through them," he said. "We're going to sell the house, Dad. The market's really good right now. The money can go into a nice facility for you, somewhere with activities and—" I ended the call. I sat down on the top step of my porch. The concrete was warm from the afternoon sun. A neighbor's dog was barking somewhere down the street. I sat there for a long time, not because I was devastated, though I was, but because I wanted to make sure I was steady before I made the next call, because I had known this was a possibility. Not a certainty, but a possibility, and I had not been unprepared. Let me back up. Let me tell you about my son and his wife and the year that changed everything between us. My son Elliot is 41 years old. He's my only child. His mother, Carol, passed 8 years ago from a stroke. Fast, no warning, a Tuesday morning in February. Elliot took it hard. We both did. For a while after that, we were close in the way that people get close after loss, leaning on each other, calling more than usual. I thought we were going to be okay. Then he met Lena. I want to be careful here, because I don't think Lena is evil. I think she's someone who grew up in a household where money was always the language of love, who had it meant you were safe, who didn't have it meant you were vulnerable. I think she looked at Elliot and saw a man with a decent job and an aging father with a paid-off house in a good neighborhood, and she started doing math. The first time she suggested I might want to downsize. Elliot and I had only been dating about 8 months. She said it casually over dinner, like she was being helpful. "You've got all this space just for one person, Phillip. Wouldn't a nice condo be so much easier to manage?" I smiled and changed the subject. After they got married, the suggestions became more frequent. Wouldn't I be happier closer to a senior center? Had I thought about what would happen to the house when I was gone? Didn't I worry about falling? I was 63 at the time. I hadn't once worried about falling. Elliot started echoing her, gently at first, then with more certainty. "Dad, Lena and I have been looking at some places. There's a really nice independent living community over in Glenview. You'd have your own apartment, people your age." "I have people my age," I said. "I have Lou next door, and the whole crew from my Thursday morning run. I'm not lonely." "That's not the point," he said. "Then what is the point?" He didn't answer that directly. He never did. The point, and I understood this, even if he couldn't say it, was the house. It was worth somewhere around $480,000 in the current market. That's a lot of money to have sitting in an old man's name when you've got credit card debt, and a car payment and a wife who is very good at spending. About 14 months ago, I started paying closer attention. I noticed Elliot asking careful questions about my finances. He offered to help me organize my paperwork. He suggested I give him power of attorney just in case something happened. I told him I already had an attorney handling all of that. He seemed annoyed by that answer. Then, 6 months ago, he asked me directly whether I'd thought about signing the house over to him now, rather than going through probate later. He framed it as practical, efficient, a gift that would save us both headaches down the road. I told him I'd think about it. I did not tell him that the following week, I had a long conversation with my attorney, a man named George Whitfield who I've trusted for 22 years. I did not tell him that George and I spent 2 sessions going through every possible scenario. I did not tell him about the specific legal structure we put in place. I just said I'd think about it. And then I booked my trip to Portland to visit my brother Raymond, and I waited to see what Elliot would do while I was gone. Now here's something people don't fully understand about real estate law in Illinois, and I think it's worth explaining because it matters to this story. A house cannot legally be seized, sold, or transferred without the owner's consent, unless certain very specific conditions exist, like a valid court order or a legitimate power of attorney. My son had neither. What he had was a locksmith and the mistaken belief that possession was 9/10 of the law. He was wrong. What he also had and didn't know about was a property protection trust that George and I had set up 5 months earlier. My house had been placed in that trust. I was the trustee. The trust had specific conditions built into it, conditions that would become relevant very shortly. And what Elliot didn't know, what neither he nor Lena knew, was that the moment he changed those locks, he had committed a crime. In Illinois, removing someone from their own home without legal authority is considered unlawful eviction. It doesn't matter if you're the person's child. It doesn't matter if you believe you're acting in their best interest. Without a court order establishing guardianship or conservatorship, which Elliot had never pursued, because that would have required a judge to find me actually incapacitated, which no judge would have done. He had no legal right to touch my locks, my property, or my belongings. George had explained all of this to me. He had also helped me document everything over the past several months. Every conversation where Elliot pushed me to sign something. Every email where Lena suggested I was getting older and needed support. The voicemail from 3 weeks ago where Elliot mentioned that he and Lena were getting things sorted for when I got back from Portland. That voicemail was interesting. It was vague, but it was enough. I sat on my porch step and I called George. They changed the locks, I said when he picked up. Are you somewhere safe? He asked. I'm on my own porch, I said. I'm fine. Okay, he said. I could hear him already moving, the sound of a chair, papers. Give me 2 hours. I drove to a diner about a mile away and had coffee and a slice of cherry pie. I read the news on my phone. I called my brother Raymond to let him know I'd gotten home safely, without mentioning any of what was happening, because Raymond has a bad heart and I didn't see the need to worry him yet. Then I drove back and waited. George arrived with 2 things. A county sheriff's deputy named Kowalski, who had a copy of the relevant statutes, and a document that clearly established my ownership of the property and the trust in which it was held. We knocked on my own front door. Elliot opened it. He saw me, then saw the deputy, and his face did something complicated. It went through surprise and confusion and a kind of scrambling calculation all in about 2 seconds. Dad, what? Mr. Harrington, Deputy Kowalski said. We're here to address an unauthorized change of locks and the unlawful exclusion of the property owner. I'm going to need you to step outside for a moment. Lena appeared behind Elliot. She was holding her phone. She looked at me, and I looked back at her, and I didn't say anything. Elliot started talking fast. He said he was just trying to help. He said he was worried about me. He said they were planning to find me a nice place, a good place, that they'd already looked at some options. He said this was all a misunderstanding. Deputy Kowalski listened to all of it very patiently. Then he said, Sir, do you have a power of attorney giving you authority over this property? Elliot said no. Do you have a court order establishing guardianship or conservatorship over your father? Elliot said no. Then I'm going to need you to return the keys to the new locks immediately. And I'd strongly recommend you speak with an attorney before you take any further action regarding this property. Lena said, We didn't know it was illegal. That was probably the most honest thing she'd said in years. George stepped forward and explained the trust structure. He explained that not only was the house untouchable without my explicit authorization, but that Elliot's actions over the past several months had created a paper trail that could support multiple charges: unlawful eviction, attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person, and potentially elder abuse under Illinois law, depending on how aggressively the state's attorney's office wanted to pursue it. Elliot's face went white. Dad, he said, turning to me. Dad, come on. You're not going to actually. I don't know yet what I'm going to do, I said. That depends on a lot of things. But right now, I'm going to go inside my house and unpack my suitcase. Deputy Kowalski oversaw the handover of the new keys. George documented everything with photographs. Elliot and Lena left without saying much else. I went inside. The house was different. They'd been through some things. Boxes in the living room. Some of Carol's decorations moved. The paperwork from my filing cabinet spread across the kitchen table. They'd been going through my financial documents. Looking for accounts, I assumed. Looking for anything they might be able to move or access or leverage. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. I looked at the photograph on the refrigerator. Me and Carol from our trip to Yellowstone in 2003. She was laughing at something I'd said, and I couldn't remember anymore what it was. But I remembered that afternoon. The smell of sulfur from the hot springs. The way the light came down through the trees. I thought about what she would have said about all of this. Probably something like, "Phillip, you handled that right. But don't be bitter about it. Don't let it eat you." Carol was always smarter than me about things like that. I made myself dinner. Scrambled eggs and toast, nothing special, but I made it in my own kitchen on my own stove, and that felt like a lot. I watched the evening news. I went to bed at my normal time. The next morning, I called George and we talked through options. I want to be honest with you. I didn't pursue criminal charges, not because Elliot didn't deserve them, and not because I wasn't angry. I was angry, in the way that takes a long time to go away. But he is my son. He is the only part of Carol that's still walking around in the world. And even though he had done something deeply wrong, I wasn't ready to be the person who sent him to court. What I did do was update my estate plan completely. The house remains in trust. Elliot is no longer a beneficiary. I have 2 nephews, Raymond's boys, who are good people with good families, and they are now the remainder beneficiaries of the trust. I also updated my financial power of attorney so that it no longer defaults to Elliot in any scenario. George handles things now, with clear written instructions. I also sent Elliot a letter. Not angry, not mean, just clear. I told him that I knew what he'd tried to do. I told him I understood that Lena's influence and his own financial stress had led him to a place I don't think he would have reached on his own. I told him that I still loved him because he is my son, and that love doesn't have an off switch, not for me. But I told him that what he had done was a betrayal, not just of me, but of his mother's memory, and of every year we had spent as a family, and that it would take time before I could be in the same room with him, without thinking about it. I told him I hoped he would use this as a turning point. Get some counseling. Talk to someone about why he had let things go so far. Figure out who he wanted to be. I haven't heard back yet. It's been about 3 weeks. Maybe he's thinking. Maybe he's too ashamed. Maybe Lena is telling him not to respond. I don't know. What I do know is this. I ran my 3 miles this Tuesday morning. Same as always. The hydrangeas needed trimming, so I trimmed them. I had Lou from next door over for dinner on Saturday. He brought a bottle of wine, and we stayed up later than we should have, talking about old times. I've been sleeping well. My house is mine. It was always mine. And as it turns out, a man who has spent 40 years paying attention, keeping records, and knowing when to call a good lawyer is a lot harder to push aside than some people assume. People ask me sometimes, not about this specifically, but in general, what the secret is to getting older without becoming a pushover. And I always say the same thing. You stay informed, you stay organized, and you never sign anything just because someone tells you it'll make things easier. Easier for who? That's always the question worth asking. Carol used to call me stubborn. She said it like it was a flaw, but she was smiling when she said it. Maybe she was right. But I think there's another word for it, and that word is patient. I've been patient my whole life. I waited 18 months for the right house in the right neighborhood before I bought it. I saved for 7 years before I opened my small contracting business. I didn't rush anything. I didn't have to rush. And when my son and his wife decided that an old man alone in a house was something they could take advantage of, I waited. I watched. I documented. I built the kind of legal protection that most people only think about after something goes wrong. And then I went to Portland, and I let them show me exactly who they were. The lock they put on my door cost them everything they thought they were going to gain. That's the part they didn't plan for. The porch is still there. The weather vane is still spinning. The hydrangeas came in better this year than they have in a long time. Big blue clusters, the kind Carol always wanted. I sit out there some mornings with my coffee, before the heat comes up, and I watch the neighborhood wake up around me. It's a good house. It was worth protecting.